The galaxy had forgotten many things in 10,000 years. Empires had risen and fallen like waves upon a shore. Species had evolved, migrated, and sometimes vanished entirely. Stars had been born in distant nebulas, while others had died in spectacular explosions that lit up the void for centuries. But of all the things the galaxy had forgotten, the most important was a single world circling a yellow sun at the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm, Earth, and the creatures that once called it home. The conquered of 12 ruled known space now. 12 species, each ancient and powerful in their own way, had formed a coalition that kept peace through endless meetings, careful trade agreements, and the threat of combined military action against anyone who stepped out of line. They were proud of their civilization. They believed themselves wise. They thought they had learned all the lessons the universe had to teach. They were wrong. Deep in the archives of the conquered, past locked doors and security systems that even most council members could not access, there existed a single law. It was called Directive Zero, and it was older than the conquered itself. The words were simple. The Sol system is forbidden. No vessel shall approach. No signal shall be sent. Let the sleepers rest. No one remembered why. The original documents explaining the directive had been lost in the third archival purge 6,000 years ago. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered that the purge had been deliberate, that someone had wanted the reasons forgotten. But such whispers were dismissed as conspiracy theories by serious scholars. Most members of the conquered believed Directive Zero was simply superstition, a relic from a more fearful age when their ancestors jumped at shadows. Ambassador of the was one such believer. He was tall for his species, with 4 muscular arms covered in green scales and eyes that gleamed with ambition. For 30 years he had climbed the political ranks of the conquered, stepping on rivals and making alliances with the powerful. Now he stood at the edge of the greatest opportunity of his career. His scientists had discovered something remarkable. A massive asteroid belt, rich with rare minerals and precious metals, was drifting through space on a trajectory that would bring it dangerously close to the forbidden Sol system. The resources contained in those rocks could power starships for centuries. They could build weapons, fuel economies, and shift the balance of power in the conquered forever. And they were just sitting there, unclaimed, because of an ancient law that no one understood. Brought his proposal before the full council. He stood in the great chamber where representatives of all 12 species gathered, and he spoke with passion and conviction. He called Directive Zero an embarrassment to modern civilization. He mocked the idea that some long-dead threat could still matter after 10,000 years. He painted pictures of prosperity and progress that made the council members lean forward in their seats. The debate lasted for 3 days. The older species urged caution. The who lived for thousands of years and had longer memories than most seemed troubled by the proposal, but they could not explain why. They only said that some things were forbidden for good reasons, even if those reasons had been forgotten. It was not enough. The vote came down to a narrow margin, but won. Directive Zero was relaxed. A mining fleet would be sent to harvest the asteroid belt, staying just outside Sol system's traditional boundaries. 300 ships launched from conquered space 2 weeks later. They were the pride of the industrial fleet, massive vessels designed to crack open asteroids and process their contents. Each ship carried a crew of hundreds, along with mining equipment worth more than some planets. Fleet Commander led them personally, eager to share in the glory that had promised. The journey took several weeks. As they approached the forbidden region, some crew members grew nervous. Old stories circulated through the ships, tales passed down through generations about monsters that slept in the dark. But Commander dismissed such fears. He was a military officer, trained in logic and strategy. He did not believe in monsters. The fleet crossed the boundary into Sol space without incident, allowed himself a smile. He had just proven that Directive Zero was nothing but superstition. He ordered his ships to spread out and begin scanning for the richest asteroids. That was when they found the satellite. It was small, no larger than a shuttle, tumbling slowly through the void. Its design was completely alien to conquered technology, all sharp angles and dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The fleet's sensors could barely get a reading on it. Whatever species had built this thing, they had technology that the conquered had never encountered. As the nearest ship approached for a closer scan, the satellite stopped tumbling. It oriented itself toward the fleet with sudden, precise movements that spoke of systems far more advanced than anything should be after 10,000 years of dormancy. Then it spoke. The message came in 1,000 languages, some that the conquered's translators recognized and many that they did not. But the meaning was clear in all of them. You have entered protected space. This is your only warning. Leave now and you may live. Commander stared at the message on his screen. Around him, his bridge crew had gone silent. He could see fear in their eyes, the ancient terror that came from encountering something unknown and powerful. But had not risen to his rank by showing fear. His people were warriors. And this message was 10,000 years old, an automated response from a civilization that had probably crumbled to dust long ago. He laughed. The sound echoed through the silent bridge. "It's a recording," he announced to his crew. "Nothing more. Whatever species left this warning is long dead. We have nothing to fear from ghosts." He ordered the fleet to continue forward. The satellite's single eye, a lens of deep crimson, tracked their movements. It sent a single pulse of energy deep into the system, toward the third planet from the yellow sun. On Earth, in vaults buried miles beneath the surface, lights that had been dark for 10,000 years began to flicker. Machines that had waited in perfect silence hummed to life. Screens displayed a simple message that scrolled endlessly. Perimeter breach detected. Awakening protocol initiated. And in the endless rows of cryogenic pods, where 8 billion humans had slumbered through the first pod began to open. The galaxy had forgotten why it should fear humanity. It was about to remember. The cold was the first thing she felt. It crept through her bones like a living thing, sharp and biting, pulling her up from dreams that had lasted for ages. Then came the light, harsh and white, stabbing through eyelids that had not opened in 10,000 years. Admiral Saya took her first breath in and immediately started coughing. The cryogenic fluid drained from her pod with a soft hissing sound. Medical systems built into the chamber walls scanned her body, checking for damage, ensuring that the long sleep had not broken her. Needles from her arms, having pumped her full of revival drugs that were already warming her blood and sharpening her mind. She remembered everything. That was the first sign that something was wrong. The human memory was not designed for 10,000 years of existence. Normal cryogenic sleep would have left gaps, confusion, a fog that took weeks to clear. But's mind was sharp as a blade. She remembered her childhood in Singapore, her years at the Naval Academy, her first command, her 100th battle. She remembered the war. And she remembered why they had chosen to sleep. "Good morning, Admiral," said a calm voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I apologize for the abrupt awakening, but we have a situation." Forced herself to sit up, ignoring the protests of muscles that had not moved in forever. The revival drugs were good, the best that human science had ever created, but nothing could make waking from 10,000 years of sleep feel pleasant. "Apollo," she said, her voice rough and dry, "status report." The artificial intelligence that had watched over humanity during the long sleep responded immediately. Apollo 7 was old, far older than any AI had a right to be. He had been created specifically for this task, to guard and maintain the vaults while humanity rested. For 10,000 years he had counted every second, monitored every system, and waited for this moment. Approximately 6 hours ago, A fleet of 300 vessels breached the outer perimeter, Apollo reported. They ignored the warning satellite and are currently conducting mining operations in the outer asteroid belt. I have identified them as a species that did not exist during our active period. They appear to be members of something called the Concord of 12. Closed her eyes. Part of her had hoped that when they finally woke, it would be to a galaxy that had learned to leave them alone. That hope died quietly in her chest. Are they hostile? She asked. Unknown. They have not fired weapons or attempted communication beyond ignoring our warning. However, their presence in protected space is itself a violation of the agreements made before the sleep. The agreements were made with species that might not exist anymore, said. She swung her legs over the side of the pod and tested her weight. The floor was cold against her bare feet. How many have you awakened? Currently, you are the only one. However, I have prepared the next phase of revival. Admiralty and command staff are ready to be brought online within the hour. Full military deployment can be achieved in 72 hours. She was not tall, but there was something in the way she held herself that made her seem larger than she was. She had commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands. She had fought battles across star systems. She had watched species die. Begin the awakening sequence, she ordered. Priority to tactical staff and ship crews. I want the Navy ready to move within 48 hours. Understood, Admiral. May I ask your intentions? Walked to the window of the revival chamber. Beyond the glass, she could see the vast expanse of the vault stretching into the distance. Row upon row of cryogenic pods, each one holding a sleeping human, extended farther than the eye could see. 8 billion people had trusted her and the other commanders to keep them safe. First we watch, she said. We learn who these are, what this Concord is, and why they came here. Then we decide what to do. And if they prove hostile. Reflection stared back at her from the window. She looked the same as she had 10,000 years ago, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked black hair and eyes that had seen too much. The cryogenics had preserved her perfectly, but she felt old in ways that had nothing to do with her body. Then we remind them why they should have let us sleep. Over the next 2 days, the vaults came alive with activity. Commanders who had led humanity through its darkest hours opened their eyes and remembered. Scientists who had built weapons capable of breaking worlds stretched their minds and began reviewing 10 of accumulated data. Soldiers who had faced horrors that would drive lesser species checked their equipment and found everything in perfect working order. Apollo had been busy during the long sleep, not just maintaining what existed, but improving it. Human technology had been formidable 10,000 years ago. Now, enhanced by an AI that had nothing to do but think and create for 10, it was something else entirely. In the hollow centers of moons throughout the solar system, ships began to power up their reactors. They were not like the vessels the Concord used. Human warships were not built for comfort or efficiency. They were built for one purpose only: victory. Their hulls were thick with armor that could withstand direct hits from plasma weapons. Their engines could accelerate at rates that would kill any unprotected biological organism. Their weapons. The weapons were Apollo's masterpiece. Gravity lances that could crush matter into singularities. Temporal disruptors that aged targets by thousands of years in seconds. Swarms that devoured enemy ships and used the raw materials to build more of themselves. Every nightmare that human minds had ever imagined, given form and function. On the third day, Admiral stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Sleepless Fury. Around her, crew members who had been frozen for 10,000 years worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. They did not speak much. There was not much to say. They all knew what might be coming. The fleet has finished loading their cargo, Apollo reported. They appear to be preparing to leave. Show me. A holographic display appeared before, showing the alien fleet beginning to form up for departure. They were large ships, built for industrial work rather than war. They had no idea what was watching them from the darkness of Sol space. "Broadcast a message," ordered. "All frequencies, all languages in Apollo's database." "Ready, Admiral." Straightened her uniform, a gesture from an age when such things mattered, and spoke clearly. "You were warned. You did not listen. Pray to whatever gods you have. We are awake." On the command deck of the flagship, Commander heard the message and felt his blood run cold. The voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something beneath that calm, something ancient and terrible that spoke of wars fought and won against impossible odds. For the first time in his career, understood what true fear felt like. The giants were waking, and they were not happy. The message from Sol space reached the conquered council within hours. It spread through communication networks like fire through dry grass. Within a day, every species in the conquered had heard the words, "You were warned. You did not listen. We are awake." Most dismissed it as a hoax, some elaborate trick, perhaps created by political rivals of Ambassador to embarrass him. Others thought it might be an automated response from ancient defense systems, meaningless threats from machines that had no real power behind them. The galaxy had been at peace for centuries. The idea that some forgotten species could threaten that peace seemed ridiculous. But not everyone was so certain. Keeper of the was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species. He had seen 4,000 years pass with his own eyes, had watched empires crumble and new ones rise from their ashes. His scales had faded from bright gold to pale yellow with age, and his movements were slow and careful, but his mind remained sharp. When he heard the message from Sol space, something stirred in his memory. Not a clear recollection, but a feeling, a sense of dread that had been passed down through generations of his people, a warning encoded in stories and traditions that most modern considered nothing more than myth. He went to the Forbidden Archive. The archive was a vault deep beneath the Concord's Capitol building, sealed behind doors that could only be opened with the unanimous consent of all 12 council members. In 10,000 years, it had been opened exactly twice. The contents within were considered too dangerous for normal access, too disturbing for civilized minds to contemplate. Used his authority as senior keeper to demand an emergency session. The council, curious and somewhat amused by the old scholar's urgency, granted permission. The doors opened for the third time in galactic history. Inside found what he feared. The records were stored on crystal matrices, technology so old that modern computers could barely read it, but was patient. He spent hours transferring the data, translating the ancient languages, piecing together the truth that the galaxy had forgotten. What he found made his blood run cold. 10,000 years ago there had been a different Concord. Not 12 species, but 1,200, a vast coalition that ruled most of the known galaxy. They had been powerful, arrogant, certain of their dominance over all lesser forms of life. When their scouts discovered a small blue world orbiting a yellow sun, they saw nothing but opportunity. The natives were primitive, confined to their single planet, barely capable of traveling to their own moon. The old Concord decided to conquer them. They expected an easy victory. They were wrong. Read the accounts of survivors from that ancient war, their words preserved across. They spoke of humans as if describing demons from nightmare. They adapt faster than any species we have encountered. Weapons that work once against them never work twice. Whatever we used, they learned from it, improved upon it, and turned it back against us. We underestimated their short. We thought it made them weak. We did not understand that beings who live only decades think nothing of dying. They throw themselves into battle without hesitation, without fear, accepting death as simply another tool to be used. They remember everything. Every wrong done to them is recorded, stored, and they repay each one with interest. They do not forgive. They do not forget. They do not stop. We asked for mercy. We begged. They looked at us with eyes like ice and asked why we had shown no mercy when we were winning. We had no answer. The war had lasted 200 years. By the end, 900 species were extinct, not defeated, not conquered, but gone entirely, wiped from the universe as if they had never existed. The remaining 300 had surrendered unconditionally. But then something unexpected happened. Humanity, standing victorious over the broken remains of a galactic empire, had looked at what they had become and been horrified. They had started as victims defending their home. They had ended as the greatest destroyers the galaxy had ever seen. Their leaders made a choice. They would seal themselves away, retreat to their home system, and sleep. They would give the galaxy time to recover, time to grow, time to learn from the mistakes of the past. Perhaps in 10,000 years, the universe would be ready for peace. But if anyone disturbed them, if anyone ignored the warning and violated their space, they would wake, and they would not be merciful again. Finished reading and sat in silence for a long time. His hands trembled. His heart's beat too fast. He understood now why Directive Zero existed, why the original reasons had been sealed away. Some truths were too terrible to be remembered. But forgetting had not protected them. Forgetting had led them directly into disaster. He gathered the records and broadcast them to every member of the Conquered. Every screen on every world in civilized space flickered with the ancient accounts of humanity's wrath. Billions of beings watched in growing horror as they learned what their ancestors had awakened. The Conquered Council erupted into chaos. Species accused each other of incompetence. Ambassador, who had proposed relaxing Directive Zero, found himself surrounded by former allies who now looked at him with murder in their eyes. His career did not just crumble, it evaporated. Emergency sessions ran through the night. Some demanded immediate retreat, a formal apology sent to Sol Space along with whatever reparations humanity might accept. Others, led by the Military Council, refused to show weakness. They argued that humanity had been asleep for 10,000 years. Surely their technology had degraded. Surely their weapons no longer functioned. Surely a united conquered fleet could defeat them if war became necessary. The debate raged for days. In the end, fear won out over wisdom. Not fear of humanity, but fear of appearing weak before the other species. The Conquered voted to assemble a war fleet. 10,000 ships gathered from across civilized space. It was the largest military force in Conquered history, a statement of power that was meant to intimidate any enemy into submission. Admirals who had never lost a battle commanded vessels bristling with weapons. They told themselves that the ancient records were exaggerated, that no species could be as terrible as the humans of legend. They told themselves that they would win. They were wrong. As the Conquered fleet launched toward Sol Space, Admiral watched their approach on her tactical display. She counted their ships, analyzed their formations, studied their weapons. Apollo provided constant updates, comparing Conquered technology to human capabilities. The comparison was not even close. "They are sending 10,000 ships," observed quietly. "They must believe that numbers will save them." "Their weapons are approximately equivalent to our technology from 11,000 years ago," Apollo reported. "Before the sleep, before my improvements, they pose no significant threat to our forces." Nodded slowly. She had hoped the galaxy had changed, had grown wiser during their long rest. She had wanted to believe that the new civilizations would be different from the old ones. But the universe seemed determined to prove her wrong. "How many ships do we need?" she asked. "To defeat them, one would be sufficient. However, I recommend a symbolic number." Almost smiled. Even after 10,000 years, Apollo understood human psychology. 12 ships, she decided, one for each species in their Conquered. Let them see exactly what they are facing. "A message?" "Yes." His voice hardened. "Let them know that we gave the galaxy 10,000 years to become better. We are about to find out if they wasted that time." The 12 ships of the human fleet moved to intercept. Behind them, the sleeping masses of humanity rested in their pods, dreaming dreams of peace that might never come. And above it all, the stars watched in silence, as they always had. The conquered fleet arrived at the edge of Sol space with all the confidence of an empire that had never known true defeat. 10,000 warships spread across the void in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with weapons designed to crack moons and shatter continents. Admirals from a dozen species stood on their bridges, watching their displays, certain of victory. Then they saw what was waiting for them. 12 ships, just 12, hanging in the darkness like silent predators. They were smaller than conquered vessels, their hulls dark and angular, designed not for beauty but for purpose. There were no markings, no decorations, nothing to indicate nationality or fleet designation, just clean lines and an absence of everything unnecessary. Supreme Commander of the combined fleet stared at his display in disbelief. He had expected an ancient armada, rusted hulks held together by failing systems. He had prepared for thousands of enemy vessels, perhaps tens of thousands. His tacticians had run countless simulations based on the historical records. 12 ships was an insult. "Are we certain these are the human vessels?" he demanded. "They could be decoys, distractions while their main fleet positions elsewhere." His sensor officer, a nervous young, checked her readings 3 times before answering. "These are the only human ships in the system, Commander. Our long-range scans show no other vessels, no hidden fleets, nothing." Felt anger rising in his chest. He had come here ready for a great battle, for glory that would be remembered for generations. Instead, the humans had sent a token force, barely worth destroying. "They mock us," he growled. 12 ships against 10,000, they believe us to be no threat at all." "Perhaps they truly have degraded over the," suggested his tactical advisor. 10,000 years is a long time. Their technology may have failed, their population dwindled. These 12 ships might be all they have left. Wanted to believe it. The alternative was too terrible to consider. "All ships advance," he ordered. "Weapons free on my command." The conquered fleet surged forward. 10,000 vessels, representing the combined military power of 12 species, closed the distance with practiced precision. Weapons charged, targeting systems locked, crews prepared for combat. The human ships did not move. "Commander," the sensor officer called out, her voice uncertain. "I am reading unusual energy signatures from the human vessels. Their power output is impossible. Our sensors must be malfunctioning." "What do you mean, impossible?" "Each of those ships is generating more power than our entire fleet combined." Felt the first cold touch of fear. He opened his mouth to order a halt, to reconsider the engagement, to perhaps seek a diplomatic solution. He was too late. The human ships fired. There was no warning, no communication, no chance to surrender. Beams of pure darkness lanced across the void, and wherever they touched, conquered ships simply ceased to exist. Not exploded, not destroyed, but collapsed inward into points of infinite density that swallowed everything around them. 300 ships vanished in the first second. Chaos erupted across the conquered fleet. Captains screamed orders that made no sense. Ships broke formation, trying to flee in every direction at once. Weapons fired wildly, their shots falling millions of kilometers short of the human vessels. The gravity lances fired again, and again, and again. Admiral watched the battle from the bridge of the Sleepless Fury with an expression of cold detachment. Around her, crew members worked their stations with mechanical efficiency. There was no joy in what they were doing, no triumph, just the careful, professional execution of a task that needed to be done. "They are attempting to retreat," Apollo reported. "Approximately 7,000 vessels remain combat-capable." "Switch to temporal disruptors," ordered. "I want them to see what happens to those who challenge us." The human ships shifted their fire. New weapons activated, devices that bent the very fabric of time itself. Conquered vessels that were struck did not explode. They aged. In seconds that stretched into centuries, their hulls corroded, their systems failed, their crews turned to dust. Ships that had been new and powerful became ancient wrecks, then collapsed into nothing at all. The psychological effect was devastating. Conquered crews watched in horror as vessels beside them simply rotted away, falling apart as if were passing in the blink of an eye. Some crews went mad. Others simply stopped fighting, unable to process what they were witnessing. 3 hours after the battle began, it was over. 8,000 conquered ships had been destroyed. Not a single human vessel had been scratched. The survivors, approximately 2,000 vessels, drifted in scattered formations, their weapons powered down, their crews waiting for death. Stared at them on her display. She remembered the war of 10,000 years ago, the terrible things humanity had done to survive and to win. She remembered promising herself that if they ever woke, they would be different. Apollo, open a channel to the surviving fleet. Channel open, Admiral. His voice echoed through 2,000 ships, reaching the ears of beings who had just watched their world's finest warriors die in an instant. "This battle is over," she said. "You came here to destroy us. You failed. By the rules of the war your ancestors started, I would be within my rights to finish what we began 10,000 years ago, to hunt down every member of your conquered and erase you from existence." In the shattered remains of the conquered fleet, beings of a dozen species held their breath. But we did not sleep for 10,000 years to wake up as the monsters we once were. We chose to rest because we had become something terrible, and we wanted to give ourselves time to become something better. Paused, letting her words sink in. "Go home. Tell your leaders what you saw here today. Tell them that we gave you 10,000 years to grow beyond the mistakes of your ancestors. You wasted that time. You made the same choices they made, sent your fleets to our space, and tried to take what was not yours." Her voice hardened. "We are offering you one more chance. Send your diplomats, send your scholars, send those who wish for peace, but never send your warships again. The next time you enter our space with weapons charged, there will be no survivors to carry messages home." The channel closed. The surviving conquered vessels hung motionless for a long moment. Then slowly, they began to turn away. On the bridge of his battered flagship, Supreme Commander stared at his display with empty eyes. Everything he had believed about the universe had been shattered in 3 hours. His fleet, the most powerful force in conquered history, had been destroyed by 12 ships without suffering a single casualty. 12 ships. He thought about the historical records, the accounts of the ancient war. At the time, he had dismissed them as exaggerated, mythological stories inflated by generations of retelling. Now he understood that if anything, those records had underestimated humanity's power. How do you fight an enemy like that? How do you negotiate with beings who could erase your entire civilization before lunch? The answer, realized, was that you did not. You apologized. You offered whatever they wanted, and you prayed that they were serious about wanting peace. As his fleet limped home, carrying news of the worst defeat in galactic history, found himself hoping desperately that humanity truly had become something different during their long sleep. Because if they had not, then everything he knew and loved was already dead. The universe just had not realized it yet. Behind him, the 12 human ships maintained their position. They did not pursue. They did not gloat. They simply watched as the broken remnants of a galactic armada retreated into the darkness. And in her command chair, Admiral closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of grief for the beings who had died. They had been foolish, arrogant, blind to the lessons of history. But they had not deserved extinction. She hoped their survivors would understand the gift they had been given. She hoped they would use their second chance wisely. She hoped humanity would not have to teach them the lesson again. 1 month after the Battle of the Threshold, a single unarmed vessel approached Earth. It was small, barely larger than a shuttle, carrying no weapons and flying with its shields powered down. A white banner of peace flew from its hull, a symbol that meant surrender in every known language in the galaxy. Inside the vessel sat 12 representatives, one from each species of the conquered. They had been chosen carefully, not warriors or politicians, but scholars, philosophers, beings known for their wisdom rather than their power. Among them was Ambassador, whose proposal had started this disaster. He had begged to be included in the delegation, not to save his ruined career, but to personally apologize for what he had done. Admiral met them at the landing platform herself. She wore no uniform, no medals, no signs of her rank. Just simple civilian clothes that made her look like what she was, a tired old woman who had seen too much war. "Welcome to Earth," she said simply. "I am glad you came." The delegates emerged from their ship with visible nervousness. Was the first to step forward, his 4 hands clasped together in the gesture of deep respect. "Admiral," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "on behalf of the conquered and on behalf of myself personally, I offer our most profound apologies. Our ignorance does not excuse our actions, but we hope it might explain them. We did not know what we were doing." Studied him for a long moment. She saw fear in his eyes, guilt, and something else, genuine remorse. "Walk with me," she said. "There are things you need to see." She led them down into the vaults, through corridors that stretched for kilometers, past chambers filled with machinery that hummed with quiet power, into the heart of human civilization. The delegates walked in awed silence, staring at wonders they could not begin to understand. Finally, they reached the central chamber. Here, the cryogenic pods stretched as far as the eye could see. Millions upon millions of sleeping humans, their faces peaceful, their bodies perfectly preserved by technology that made conquered science look like children's toys. 8 billion of us slept here," said quietly. "For 10,000 years we dreamed. Some of us are still sleeping. Most, actually. We wake only as many as we need." "Why?" asked a scholar. "With your power you could have ruled the galaxy. You could have taken anything you wanted. Why choose to sleep?" Walked to one of the pods and rested her hand on its surface. Inside, a young man slept, his face unmarked by the horrors of war. "Because we had to," she said. "When your ancestors attacked us, we were a peaceful species. We had just learned to travel between stars. We had dreams of exploring the universe, making friends, building something wonderful. Then the attacks came, and we changed." She turned to face the delegates. "We became very good at war, too good. By the end, we were not defending ourselves anymore. We were hunting. Every species that had raised a hand against us we tracked down and destroyed. Not because we had to, because we wanted to. We had learned to love destruction." The delegates shifted uncomfortably. They had read the historical records, but hearing it from a human's own lips was different. "When the war ended, our leaders looked at what we had become and felt horror. We had saved ourselves, but at the cost of our souls. If we continued out into the galaxy, we would become the very monsters we had fought against. We would conquer, enslave, destroy, until nothing remained but us and the silence." Walked back to the group. "So we chose to sleep. We sealed ourselves away, hoping that time would heal us. Hoping that when we woke, we would remember what it meant to be human, not warriors, not conquerors, just people." "And if we had not attacked," asked, his voice barely a whisper, "if we had simply taken the resources and left?" Smiled sadly. "Then we would have slept forever or close to it. We were happy in our dreams. We did not want to wake." The weight of that statement settled over the delegates like a physical thing. They had not just started a war. They had robbed humanity of the peace they had chosen. They had forced them back into a universe they had tried to escape. "I am sorry," said. "I am so sorry." "I know," his voice was gentle, And I believe you. That is why we are having this conversation instead of the alternative. Over the following weeks, negotiations proceeded better than anyone had expected. The humans made no demands for territory, no requests for tribute, no threats of future violence. They asked only for recognition, for trade, for the chance to rejoin the galactic community as partners rather than conquerors. The conquered agreed to everything. They would have agreed to anything. A new treaty was signed, the Compact of Sol. Humanity would share its technology, its art, its philosophy. 10,000 years of dreaming had produced wonders that the galaxy had never imagined. Music that could make listeners weep with joy. Stories that spanned centuries and explored the deepest questions of existence. Science that bordered on magic. In return, the galaxy would accept human observers, human laws within human space, and one rule that could never be broken. Never again would weapons be raised against humanity. Never again would their space be violated. The past was past, but the future would be different. On the day the compact was signed, admirals stood in the central vault and watched as more pods began to open. Not soldiers this time, but teachers, artists, scientists, children. The full breadth of human civilization rising from the long sleep. A young girl, no more than 8 years old in appearance, climbed out of her pod and looked around with wide, curious eyes. She saw watching her and walked over, taking the admiral's weathered hand in her small fingers. "Is the war over?" she asked. Knelt down to meet her eyes. "The war ended 10,000 years ago, little one. We just had to remind some people." "Then what happens now?" Looked up at the ceiling of the vault, where windows had been installed during the awakening. Through them, she could see the stars, bright and beautiful, full of possibilities she had once thought humanity would never experience. "Now we live," she said. The girl smiled and squeezed her hand. 100 years later, a young student named Thessaly visited the Memorial of Awakening. It stood where the first vault had opened, a museum dedicated to humanity's long sleep and eventual return. She walked through exhibits showing ancient cryogenic technology, records of the war, artifacts from 10,000 years of dreams. An elderly human man noticed her standing before a display of the Battle of the Threshold. He was old, his hair white and his face lined with age, but he moved with the easy grace of a veteran. "You seem troubled," he observed. Thessaly looked at him with confusion in her eyes. "I do not understand. You could have destroyed us. Every ship, every world, every member of our species. You had the power. Why did you not use it?" The old man considered the question for a long moment. Through the museum's windows, they could see the bustling streets of the city outside. Humans and aliens walked side by side, talking, laughing, living. "Because power is not about what you can do," he finally said. "It is about what you choose not to do. We slept for 10,000 years to learn that lesson." He gestured toward the world beyond the windows. "We hoped you would learn it too." Thessaly thought about her home world, about her people, about the war that had almost ended everything. She thought about the humans she had met during her studies, their strange kindness mixed with that ever-present hint of something dangerous beneath the surface. "I think," she said slowly, "we are beginning to understand." The old soldier smiled. For the first time in a very long time, it reached his eyes. Outside the museum, the sun was setting over a city that had once been silent and abandoned. Now it rang with laughter, with music, with the sounds of a civilization that had finally found its way home. Humanity was awake. And for the first time in 10,000 years, they were at peace. The stars above watched in silence as they always had, but now, at last, they watched with something like hope. The long sleep was over. The new dawn had begun.